We continue now at the top of Daf Dalet Amud Aleph in Mesechet Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 4a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara asked that Rabbi Yochanan generally follows a Stam Mishnah, and if we're understanding our Stam Mishnah to say that a Lav Shein Bo Maisa gets Malkus, so that would contradict what Rabbi Yochanan himself says. Rabbi Yochanan himself says that a Lav Shein Bo Maisa does not get Malkus, and the Gemara in the previous Amud answered that there's another Mishnah later on, and that actually has the opposite. It's a Stam Mishnah that has the opposite implication, that a Lav Shein Bo Maisa does not get Malkus, and that Mishnah continues, Eino chayev ela achas. In such a case, the person is only chayev one set of malchus. The case over there is discussing where the person made the shvuah and then essentially repeated the exact same shvuah. So the point is, he's only chayev one when he violates it. Zuhi shavuas bitoy shechayovin al zedona makos ve'al shegagasa karban olav v'yored. This is a kind of shvuah that a person pronounces, that if a person does it on purpose, he's going to be chayev malchus. If a person violates it by mistake, he's going to bring the karban olav v'yored. And so we understand that Mishnah to mean zuhi, that in this particular case, the chayovin al zedona makos, there you'd be chayiv. If he did it on purpose, he'd be chayiv malchus. Aval ochel v'lo achel, but let's say it would be the reverse kind of shvuah. Let's say it's a situation where he takes a shvuah that he's going to eat, and then he does not eat, so that's a lav she'ein bo maisa, there's no action. The implication of that Mishnah is low lucky. The implication of that Mishnah is that the person would not get malchus, and therefore the implication of that stam Mishnah later on is that lav she'ein bo maisa ain loken olav, and so essentially it's a contradiction in terms of Stam Mishnah, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan ultimately says Lav Shein Bo Maisa Ein Loken Olav. But the Gemara says, Michli, let us see, High Stama v'High Stama. They're both Stam Mishnahs. We now have two Stam Mishnahs that contradict one another. My Chazi Da'avid Ki High Stama, Li'avid Ki High Stama. Why do you see fit to follow that Stam Mishnah, follow the other Stam Mishnah? But the Gemara continues in it and says, V'lataymech, well, according to your reasoning, if that's your question, how does Rabbi Yochanan know which Stam Mishnah to follow? But you could ask that question on the Mishnayos themselves. Rebbe Gufe, when it came to Rebbe himself, when he said of the Mishnayos, Hechi Sasam Lan Hacha Hachi, V'Hacha Hachi, how does he have one Stam Mishnah that says one thing, and the other Stam Mishnah says the opposite? And there's the obvious answers as follows. Elamei Karasavar, you have to say that originally Rebbe held, Lav Shein Bo Maisa Loken Olav, that a Lav that has no Maisa, that has no action, there is Malchus. V'Sasman, he set that up as a Stam, unattributed Mishnah. V'Hadar Savar, and then he changed his mind and he thought, Ein Loken Olav, that there is no Malchus in such a case, Ustam V'Sisma, and he set that up as an unattributed Mishnah. U'Mishnah lo zazim imakom, and the original Mishnah doesn't move from its place. In other words, if Rebbe ever changes his mind, he keeps the original Mishnah, and it is understood that we should follow what is in the later Mishnah. Rashi explains, Eino chayiv el achas, again in a situation where essentially the person repeated the same shvuah, he's only chayiv one. Deme'achar shenishba olav shvuah rishona ne'aseres olav. Once he makes that first shvuah, it's already prohibited to him. V'chiyadar ishtab, when he goes ahead and makes another shvuah with the same basic content, havale nishba l'kayim es ha-mitzvah, that's what we call taking an oath to be mekayim something that's already a mitzvah. Utanan l'kamon, we learned in the Mishnah later on, nishba l'kayim es ha-mitzvah v'lokiyim. If a person takes an oath to fulfill a mitzvah and does not fulfill it, pater mishvuas karban, he is pater from that shvuas karban. But the Gemara continues and asks, "B'mayu kimtak Rabbi Yishmael ula Malkus." But how can you answer that our Mishnah is going according to the Tana Rabbi Yishmael and it's talking about Malkus? That was the answer we gave on the previous daf. Again, the Gemara had asked, "What does our Mishnah hold?" That our Mishnah is saying there is two, which is four. It's not true according to either Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara suggested, the Gemara answered that our Mishnah actually follows Rabbi Yishmael, and it's not talking about Karban. It's actually talking about Malkus. But the problem is Maros Negoim. The problem is one of the cases in the Mishnah is the case of Negoim, the case of Tsaras. My Malkusika, so what Malkus is there in such a situation? And the Gemara says there is Malkus, there's a possibility of Malkus by Tsaras, because it's Bahara. So let's say somebody cuts off the Tsaras, Uchir Rabbi Avin, that follows Rabbi Avin, Amar Rabbi Lo, it follows what Rabbi Avin said, that Rabbi Lo said. The Amar Rabbi Avin, Amar Rabbi Lo, because Rabbi Avin said that Rabbi Lo said, Kol Makom Shenemar Hishomer Pen Vial. Anytime it says Hishomer Pen or Al, Eino Alalosa, say it means to say a negative commandment, and so therefore there is a negative commandment when it comes to Kotzeitz Baheres, and so a situation of Baheres could in fact involve Malchus. But the Gemara continues and asks, Yitzias Shabbos, when it comes to carrying from one Rishus to another Rishus on Shabbos, my Malchus Iga, what Malchus is there over there? Why should there be Malchus in that case? How can you say that that's the explanation of the Mishnah? Lav Shanit and Lazharas Misas Bezinu, because that's a Lav that is given over as a warning for Misas Bezin, meaning violations of Shabbos involve the death penalty by court. V'chol Lav Shanit and Lazharas Misas Bezin, anytime you have have a lav, shenitan lasaras misas bezin, if the lav is designated for a punishment of death penalty, the halach is ein lokan olav. The halach is that there is no malchus, and so therefore, again, how can we say that our Mishnah is talking about a punishment of malchus? The Gemara says that's not a problem either, because mishum hachi kamukmina Rabbi Yishmael. That's the whole reason that we're saying that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yishmael. Diyamar lav shenitan lasaras misas bezin lokan olav. It happens to be that Rabbi Yishmael holds a lav shenitan lasaras misas bezin. You could get malchus if the person is warned for malchus. He would get malchus, and so therefore, again, that could be a potential explanation of our Mishnah. But the Gemara continues and asks, it sounds like we're then saying that if not for the fact that we need to be able to say that Lav Shenitan Lazharas Misas Bezin Lokan Olav, and that's why we need to say the Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael, we could have answered that the Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva, but that's not true. We had a different question on Rabbi Akiva, because Kash Yedias, there was a question by Rabbi Akiva in terms of Yedias. Again, by Yedias, it said in the Mishnah, it's 2, which is 4, and the additional, the secondary ones when it came to Yedias Hatuma was, let's say, a person had a lapse of awareness that this was Kodesh, or he had a lapse of awareness that this was the Beis HaMikdash. We said that Rabbi Akiva holds you're not chayiv a carbon in that situation, so you could never have said that it was Rabbi Akiva. But the Gemara says that's not true. You could have said it was Rabbi Akiva, because Lav Amr Rabbi Yishmael he will Malchus. Because didn't we answer? We had a similar kind of question when it came to Rabbi Yishmael in terms of Shvuah. He didn't hold of liability by Shevuos in the past tense, and we answered it is Rabbi Yishmael because we're not talking about carbon, we're talking about Malchus. You could give that same answer for Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva Nami Ula Malchus. You could simply answer that the Mishnah could have been Rabbi Akiva, and it's talking not about Karbonos, it's talking about Malchus. So again, the only reason why we really have to resort to Rabbi Yishmael is because of his opinion that Lav Shenit and Lazaris Misas Bezdin is able to get Malchus. But the Gemara still continues and asks on this answer to be saying that our Mishnah is not talking about Karban, it's talking about Malchus is difficult. Because if so, Yedios Hasros Mibayle. It shouldn't talk about Yedios. Yedios is a language you use when you talk about the fact that you had a lapse of awareness and then you realize you made a mistake. That's something that refers to Karbanos. When you're talking about Malchus, which is somebody's doing something on purpose, there you should talk about Hasros, you should talk about warnings. And the Gemara says to that, Holo Kasha, that's not difficult. Tani, the way you can teach it is Yedios to Hasros, the knowledge of warnings. We really are talking about warnings. But still the Gemara says, Yachi, if so, Shtayim Shein Arba, it shouldn't really be 2 which are 4. It should be Tartihu Dahavin. It should really be 2. Rashi explains, Tartihu Dahavin, the Ein Malchus Elimkein Hizkiru, Esatoma Va Kodesh. If we're talking about Malchus, let's say by a case of Tumah, you have to mention everything. You have to mention the fact that the person is Tameh, and you're warning him that a Tameh person cannot eat Kodesh, or you're warning him can't enter the Beis HaMikdash. Oh, it's Atoma v'HaMikdash. You warn about Atoma and Mikdash. V'tarti u'di'ika Malchus, and therefore there's 2 cases of Malchus l'Kodesh, di'ika Malchus l'Kodesh and Malchus l'Mikdash. There's Malchus for Kodesh and Malchus for Mikdash. There's no 2 which are 4 when you're talking about Malchus. The Bishlama l'Karban ika Arba. We understand by Karbonis you could talk about 4 scenarios. You could talk about Helim Tumah v'Yachal Kodesh. You could talk about he has a lapse of awareness of the Tumah and he eats Kodesh v'Zachar hulo Helim Tumah, and then he remembers that a lapse of awareness ubola Mikdash v'Zachar Helim Kodesh. And again, you could have a situation where it comes to Mikdash, he remembers the lapse of awareness by Kodesh v'Yachal and he eats it Helim Mikdash v'Nichnas lo. He has a lapse of awareness of Mikdash and he enters v'Zachar Satum and he remembers the Tumah. So you can come up with 4 scenarios when you're talking about a situation again of Karbonos, but you can't come up with 4 scenarios when it comes to Malchus. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'su, and further, as sheyesh bo yediyah b'tchila v'yediyah b'sof v'helim b'tayim, the language of the Mishnah is that he had knowledge in the beginning, he had knowledge at the end, there was a lapse of awareness in the interim. So halama l'malchus, maya vidite. What are we talking about lapses of awareness when we're talking about Malchus? V'su, and further, hareza ba'ola v'yored, the Mishnah actually uses the language that is an ola v'yored, which is referring to a carbon. So this entire answer of trying to say that our Mishnah is talking about Malchus has several difficulties, and we cannot give this answer. And so the Gemara continues and gives another answer. Elamar of Yosef, rather of Yosef says, Rebbe, the answer to the question is that our Mishnah is neither Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yishmael. It's actually Rebbe himself who arranged the Mishnayos. This is his position. V'nasiv la aliba de Tanoi, and he's going according to different Tanoim in different cases. B'yedios nasiv la Rabbi Yishmael. When you're talking about Yedias Hatoma, so that will follow Rabbi Yishmael, who again says there are 4 scenarios there. That's not true within Rabbi Akiva. B'Shevuos, and when he's talking about Shevuos, nasiv la Rabbi Akiva. So there he follows Rabbi Akiva, where again there there are 4 scenarios which might not be true according to Rabbi Yishmael. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi says, Amriso l'shmaita kamid Rav Kahana. I said over this teaching, this sugi in front of Rav Kahana, V'yamar Lini said to me, Lo tema Rebbe Nosivla aliba de tanoi v'leilo svirle. Don't simply say that Rebbe was following different tanoim in different lines of the Mishnah, but he himself doesn't hold like that. Maybe he was following Rabbi Yishmael in this particular line, he was following Rabbi Akiva in that particular line, but it wasn't his personal opinion. That's not true. Ela Rebbe taimid de nafshim mefarish. Rebbe actually is giving his personal opinion over here. He does follow Rabbi Yishmael when it comes to the situation of Yedias. He follows Rabbi Yishmael. When it comes to the situation of Shavuos, he follows Rabbi Akiva. How do we know that? The Tanya, as we learned in a brayso, minayin she'eno chayev ela al sheyesh b'yediyah b'tchila v'yediyah b'sof v'helam in time. From where do we know that a person is only liable when he has knowledge in the beginning and the end, and there's a lapse of awareness in the interim? Talmud lomar v'nelam shnei pa'amim divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says we learned that out from the fact that it says v'nelam twice. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Rabbi says eino tzarach. You don't need that. Harei ho'omer, because it says, and Rashi explains v'nelam shnei pa'amim trei v'nelam ksivi gabe tumas korban. It says the word v'nelam twice when it comes to tumas korban. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Dalid Amid Beis.